I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. We are in August, and that means Women in Translation Month. So, Women in Translation is something that's been going on and off since 2014. And what happened around 2014 was we talked a lot about how few of the women who are translated into English are actually women. And we also talked a lot about how English dominated a lot of the book spheres are on social media. Mostly YouTube, because that was the main one at that time. So we talked about establishing a form of focus on women in translation, and we meant women who originally didn't write in English but was translated into English. That means sort of that the term women in translation is a bit discussed, and it's not everyone who likes it, because the term accepts in some ways that English is the lingua franca, that that's the way it should be almost, and that you're just trying to build and bend the power dynamic instead of talking about women not writing in English, for example. So that is a much larger discussion that both you and I can absolutely have. But right now I'm just talking about women in translation as in a very pragmatic sense, as a way of talking about female presenting authors who did not originally write in English. That being the case, I became very curious to see my own journey in how many countries have I actually read women in translation from, and how has my own journey been on that. So I made this map where I charted in and divided the countries into different categories. So the blue countries are the countries that have English as their predominantly written language. So you don't really find a lot of women in translation from these countries, because there is very little written language that isn't in English in these countries. A lot of them are from British territories when Britain was an imperialist, and so that's of course influenced a lot of that discussion. Then you have the yellow category, and the yellow category are the countries that have women authors, so women who have produced in a language that isn't English, but where those books haven't been translated to English. So that's sort of the term and the category that I've used. Then you have the orange category, and the orange category are women who have some of their work translated. So these are very often female authors who write poems or short stories, and where you can find some of the poems or some of the short stories online translated into English, but where they don't necessarily have a complete book published in an English translation. You also have, for example, Bautista from the Philippines, and Nosha Gapar from Brunei. I'm very sorry that I just butchered those two names. And those two authors are currently in 2024 having their literature published according to some sources. So the books aren't yet published, but hopefully they will soon be published. So that's also why they are here in the orange category. And then you have the red category, which is women in translation. These are the countries that do have female authors who have been translated from a non-English language to an English language. It can be the non-English language is the dominant one, but it can also be a minority language. For example, what you find in the US or in the UK. So that's the categories, and the red category is over 60% of all the countries that I have been working with. And I've been working with the UN defined list. In addition to that, we do have the odd one out category, which are the stripes. And that's 2 countries where there are no known female authors. So the Vatican State and North Korea, I have not found any authors, female authors, that have been translated into English from these countries. There are some caveats that I need to say about the map. Number one, I've been doing this simply by Googling. So if you know of a female author from one of the countries that I've said doesn't have a female author, please let us know about them down below. Number two, I have not, as far as is possible, included the diaspora in this list. That's a choice I have made. In addition to that, both for the female authors and for all of the women in translation, I've made a list that you will find down below as a way of starting to find some books if you want to read something in English, but also if you might know French or German or Spanish. I've also put some non-translated female authors in that list, simply so we can start reading more female authors. And the reason why I think we should read more female authors isn't because we are supposed to check off something on our it isn't because we're supposed to check off something from Ain't I a Good Guy's list. It's because there are a lot of good authors out there that happen to be female, and they aren't being read because there is systems in place that we aren't aware of. That means that these books aren't talked about. That's why we have this focus on talking about these authors, so we can share them, and hopefully one day in the future it would really be just the best books that are talked about and not just a lot of good books who aren't talked about. So now you know about the map. I'm going to now move on to which countries have I read a book from where the author is from that country. That was such a clunky way of saying that. One more thing before we start the list. When I first did sort of categorize it, I found out that I had read from 25 countries, and I was quite disappointed with myself. Partly because reading diversely is something I've been working on for many years, so the fact that I had just 25 countries under my belt was a bit hard to have to face. In addition to the fact that I'm in addition to the fact that I'm a competitive person, and social media is a competitive place, so it highlights it highlights who's good at something and who's not good at something, and what it does mean to be good at something. I therefore was disappointed, and my husband tried to support me because he's a good guy, and he did point out that 25 different countries, excluding the countries that are English language countries, isn't that bad of a count, because we still have this system in place where these books aren't talked about, regardless if they are good books or not. And I'm saying this because if you want to try and do something similar, or if you want to try to read more diversely, it can very quickly feel like a competition with yourself and with others in sort of, oh, I'm a diverse person. But we are all on our different journeys. We are all on our different ways of what should my reading journey be. And it isn't important where you are now. What's important is, where do you want to be in the future? Do you want to read more diversely? Brilliant. What does that mean? It can mean something as simple as, I want to read from a lot of different countries, or I want to focus on, for example, South Korea or Japanese, and read a lot of books from these countries. That's also a way of reading more diversely. Could it be to include just one book? That's also brilliant. There is no bad thing here. I'm not here to sort of judge you in any way. I'm only here to judge myself. So let's judge me. The first book I want to talk about is from Vietnam. It's Dong Hung, Paradise of the Blind. And it's a book about 3 women who is trying to live and thrive in the communist Vietnam. This book was written shortly after Hung went out of the party in Vietnam, and was the first book, or one of the first books, that was translated from Vietnamese into English. I enjoy the book in the sense that she does create a very vivid description of Vietnam in a time where the country was very closed, and she does create a wonderful character gallery. I was sort of missing a bit nuance in a way. There is some sort of, and I don't know if this was intended or not intended, because she did go out of, she did leave the party, so she's very clearly critical to the party. Then I don't have, that's not the issue, but there is some sort of lack of self-reflection in the book. But the things she writes about the society and the discrimination and how people are able to find ways to survive in that kind of situation was beautiful, and a wonderful piece of literature. For the United States, I was actually considering doing something from one of the territories, for example, Puerto Rico, but instead I chose Ofelia Zepeda, Ocean Power. Zepeda is an indigenous author, and I think if I read her bio correctly, that her tribe is from very south in the US, in a desert area. And that kind of fit very much her poems, because while it's called Ocean Power, what the poems, the way I read it and interpreted, was that they're so much more focused on rain than they are the ocean. So she is talking about the importance of rain, the importance of being able to have drinking water. And if you grow up in the desert, that makes sense that the rain is a very important thing in your day-to-day activities and consciousness. She was actually the one who translated her own poems into English from her native tongue. And in her translation, she does use her native tongue. So she does have some, she uses it in a way that probably went a bit over my head, as I don't know so much about not just her tribe, but just the way the indigenous culture communicates with the US majority culture. But there is a very majesty in a lot of her poems that I enjoyed, especially again her focus on rain. For the United Kingdom, I read Kate Roberts' Feet in Chains. Kate Roberts is a Welsh author who wrote in Welsh, and her book was later translated into English. I have a video of the book review on my page because I am doing a series of reading around the world, and this was my pick for Wales. The book is about a family, working class family, who lives in Wales, and what happens to a working class family when one of them is able to work themselves out of the working class. So it's not just about the working class, but it's about the dynamic of working class and one of the children not being working class anymore. For Ukraine, I read Oksana Zabuzhko, The Museum of Abandoned Secrets. This book became quite popular after the invasion, which kind of fit because it's a family saga that follows a family throughout the when the Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and when Ukraine stopped being a part of the Soviet Union, and what certain members were willing to do during that time of the Soviet Union, and how does a country heal, get together, create one cohesive people, considering what some people were willing to do during the when they were part of the Soviet Union. So it's a family saga that talks a lot about how do we as a nation move on from something like that. For Switzerland, I picked, I picked in the sense that I've read multiple authors from some of the countries. And for Switzerland, I picked Johanna Spyri, who wrote Heidi. Heidi, which is an orphan and has to live with her grandfather in the Alps. And for Sweden, I picked Astrid Lindgren's Ronja the Robber's Daughter. Astrid Lindgren is also the author of Pippi. And the reason why when I picked Heidi, I also wanted to pick Ronja, is that these are on one hand, two very different types of books, and different types of characters. Ronja and Heidi, very different characters, but there is an interesting comparison between those two, because they both are about girls who are raised on the outskirts of society, either by the grandfather in Heidi, who lives in a small, I don't even know if you can call it a village up in the Alps, or Ronja, who is raised by her father, who is a thief. For Poland, I have read Elza Orzeskowa, the Argonauts. I've read this many years ago, and I went back into my notes to see what I thought about the book. And apparently what I wrote about the book is that some books you understand why they become lesser known, either because they have themes or the languages become barriers across time. Other times you find lesser known gems that you get insulted have become lesser known. The Argonauts was apparently a book I felt very strongly for, and when I read it and remembered how good that book is, I feel my emotions going back on that. It's about a family, and the theme of this, what the story of the story, not the plot, but the story of the story, is: should all secrets be known for everyone that secret is relevant for, or should some secrets stay hidden? For Norway, my home country, I picked Kristin Lavransdaughter by Sigrid Undset. Kristin Lavransdaughter is a series of books about a young girl in medieval Norway who falls in love with someone who isn't quite ideal, and her life. While Sigrid Undset has written a lot of different books, Kristin Lavransdaughter is talked about as her magnum opus. That was the reason why she won the Nobel Literature Prize. And as someone who's read a lot of Sigrid Undset's works, because she is one of my favorite authors, Kristin Lavransdaughter is absolutely her best work. There is something about the combination of the world building and Kristin as a character who is both flawed yet so lovable, that is a wonderful combination and makes you cry and weep yet have understanding for Kristin. For the Netherlands, I've read The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. This is the diary that a young Jewish girl wrote shortly before and during the Second World War, also when she was in hiding in a house in Amsterdam because she was Jewish and was being persecuted. And what's interesting about the book, compared to when I went and visited her house in Amsterdam, and when I say her house, I mean the house that she was hiding in, the book is so claustrophobic that I kept picturing that she was sort of sitting in a small cot under a stair somewhere, and that the rooms that she and the other people she was hiding with were so large that I was surprised by it. But that sort of shows a lot about what being enclosed and not being allowed to leave can do with you mentally. For Mozambique, I read Lília Momplé, Neighbours, The Story of a Murder. I have a video of that on my channel, because this is also a part of my Reading Around the World challenge. But very shortly, the book is about the conflicts that were happening between Mozambique and South Africa, who is the neighbour that the title refers to. And small actions and the lives of the people that were a result of that action from one incident. So you have an incident, and I'm not going to say what that is, but you have an incident, and then all of the people who are afflicted by that. And what I really enjoyed with her book is, again, how brilliant of a character drama that she creates. Every person gets their gets their backstory. Every person gets their motivation. You feel like these are real characters, and you understand why they are doing what they are doing. You don't necessarily always agree with them. You don't necessarily always sort of, yes, I would have done the same, but you can understand that these are three-dimensional people. For Latvia, I read Nora Ikstena, Soviet's Milk. This is also, I have also a full video of that one on my channel in Reading Around the World. This book is about a woman who is suffering from depression and how that influences her life, but also influences her daughter's life. And I've called it Soviet's Milk in the list because that is the true translation. But if you watch my review, I have a huge rant on why I don't think it's a good translation. Then for South Korea, I have Hye-Jin Kim, Concerning My Daughter. And this book is about a mother who has become sort of estranged from her daughter because her daughter is a lesbian, and is at the beginning of the story asked by her daughter if she can come and live with her mother because there is a problem with housing. And of course the lesbian partner is a part of the package. And then you sort of see how the mother deals with having her daughter and the lesbian partner back home, in a sense. The book is very clearly about the mother being wrong. The mother isn't in the right being homophobic. But the book is also very much trying to understand where the mother is coming from, and placing the mother's homophobia within the larger context of homophobia in South Korea. So trying to sort of understand that the mother's homophobia isn't isolated, but more a part of the culture of South Korea. For Japan, I read The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This book, I wept from almost the start to the end. It's about a maid who starts to work for a professor who's a former math professor. The professor has a brain injury. That means that he can only remember things in 80-minute chunks. And so all of this, the story is about how the housekeeper and the professor and the housekeeper's son is able to create a sort of relationship despite this limitation of only remembering things in 80-minute chunks. So he is a maths professor, and they talk a lot about both math and baseball in the book. But what I enjoyed so much about that is that the book does not talk down to you as if you're stupid if you don't understand this, but yet understand that these are concepts that not everyone might know about. So they still explain it in the book in a way where you can not necessarily understand everything from a mathematical point of view, but you can understand it from a story point of view. You don't feel like you're getting lost from the story when these things sort of come up. For Italy, I've read Grazia Deledda's After the Divorce. She is another Nobel laureate, and her book After the Divorce is about a woman whose husband is judged, is convicted for 29 years for something. And those 29 years is very important because if your there is a new law that states that if your husband is convicted for X amount of years, you are allowed to then get a divorce. And then the book is about her dilemma with being very poor, having a family that she needs to take care of, and not having a husband that can help her take care of the family, and having another suitor who wants to marry her. What I didn't enjoy about the book is that it focuses a lot about the man who is convicted, and there is a lot of debate throughout the book if he actually was convicted correctly, if he's actually innocently convicted. It's almost a Count of Monte Cristo discussion in it. So I would actually have enjoyed more to hear from the main character, but the discussions that Deledda talks about, and the whole being loyal to, when does being loyal be, when are you allowed to stop being loyal, to what detriment, how hungry do you have to be for the world to sort of think that no, it's okay for you to do the things that you choose to do. So it's a very interesting way of looking at ethics and morals on loyalty, and about being who should you then be loyal to. For Honduras, I read 13 Colors of the Honduran Resistance by Melissa Cardoza. This is another one that I have a fuller video on for my reading around the world. But this Melissa Cardoza was a journalist living in Honduras, and she created 13 portraits of, I think all of them are women, but 13 portraits of people who during the Honduran Revolution had their resistance in some way or other. So she focuses on larger parts of creating a resistance, but also small ways of being defiant. And that's what I really enjoyed about the book, that you sort of have, there are so many different ways that people were protesting the new dictator in the country. For France, I picked George Sand, The Devil's Pool. This is an older text, and it's about traveling to a small town and romanticizing living in a small town in comparison to being corrupted by living in the city. And that this was, of course, a part of a larger discussion during the Industrial Revolution. For Finland, I read Tove Jansson, and for her, I've just picked Moomin. And the Moomin isn't one book, but just anything from the Moomin series, because these are so brilliant children's books with such a philosophical edge to them that takes children seriously and does not talk down to children and do not fear children and do not think that we need to be careful what we feed children because we do not know what we will get back. That takes children seriously, and you can't really go wrong with any of the books. For Egypt, I read Memories of a Woman Doctor by Nawal el-Saadawi. This book is about a woman doctor, a woman who wants to be a doctor at a time where this was very controversial. And it's very easy to just say that the book is about gender roles. And on one level, it is about gender roles. But I think more precisely, you can say that the book is about the masculine and the feminine. And when I'm saying masculine and feminine, I don't mean just gender roles. But the whole issue with going into medicine and looking at medical science, which is very masculine-dominated science and a masculine-dominated way of thinking, and looking at what do we lose with all of this masculine way of thinking and doing. For Denmark, I've read Karen Blixen's Babette's Feast. This is a fairly short story, so very often if you're going to buy the book, you'll get Babette's Feast and others, so other short stories. And the best way I can actually describe Babette's Feast is that it's about being Protestant. And I don't mean being Protestant in the sense that it's about the Protestant organization, but about being Protestant in your day-to-day. What does forgiveness mean? What does it mean to be Christian? Which values do you focus on that to be truly Christian? And especially when forgiveness isn't easy, when the true values of being, and that's why I'm talking about the Protestant, because there are so many different ways of interpreting this. But when it isn't easy, what does that mean and where do we then go? For Cuba, I've read Wendy Guerra, I Was Never the First Lady, which is about a radio DJ whose parents were a part of the revolution. So she is now looked down upon and sort of getting side-eyed because she lost her parents when she was a child because they were very revolutionary. That was a hard word for me to say right now. And what's interesting with this book is that you never quite know what then comes first in this radio DJ who simply just wants to live her own life. But she keeps getting side-eyed, keeps getting treated as if she was her parents and has her parents' same views and would do what her parents would have done. And this, of course, builds up and has consequences, and you don't really know if it is what causes what in the book. And I don't think the book wants to sort of lay it out either. It just sort of asks the question. So you get a lot of interesting reflections on what causes what in our actions. For China, I've read Lindgren, White Snakes and Other Stories. White Snake is a myth, a very famous Chinese myth, about a man figuring out that he is actually married to a white snake demon. And life goes on. Lindgren, in her retelling of the White Snake and a lot of her other short stories in the collection that at least I read, has put a lesbian twist on it, has sort of put a same-sex female couple at the center of the discussion. And that, of course, creates the myth to be about something more than what the original myth was about. And I really enjoyed a lot of her writing because I felt like she wasn't trying to talk about lesbianism just to talk about lesbianism. She was talking about lesbianism and very clearly linking that up to otherness, but also talking about lesbianism and linking it up to women's roles and women's possibilities in China. So both her book and Hye-Jin Kim's Concerning My Daughter are books talking about being lesbian in cultures where that is still very taboo. But having two very different ways of talking about that. For Chile, I've read a lot of Isabel Allende, and I want to especially talk about her book Eva Luna. And this is a story about Eva, who is born by a maid in secret, and her life, pretty much, and how she sort of creates a life for herself. The backdrop is, of course, Chile. It's about a lot of the troubles that is happening in Chile, about a lot of the larger troubles that has happened in Chile, but also a lot of the commentary regarding domestic violence, sexual abuse. There is at least one larger trans character in the book who gets some abuse. None of this is very graphic. It's sort of mentioned that this has happened. But this is, of course, a part of the backdrop of the very realistic Chile that Eva Luna is a part of. And she still manages to create a life for herself. She still manages to thrive and to create connections. And this book is absolutely about connections. It's absolutely about how to thrive in a society, especially in a society so dominated by violence, we need to connect with one another to be able to survive. And this creates so sweet, wonderful scenes in the book. For Belgium, I chose Madeleine Bordeaux, La Femme de Guy. So in the English translation, they kept the original French title, but roughly translated to English, it means Guy's women. And this is about a woman who is married to Guy, who realizes that he's been unfaithful. And what I enjoyed about the book, again, there is so much realism in so many of the books, that there is so much about how devastating something like that can be. But what I also enjoyed about the book is that if your husband is unfaithful, do not go after the other woman. She isn't the one who promised to be loyal to you. She isn't the one who promised to be faithful, to promise to be there. Your husband is the one who cheated. Your husband is the one who broke your confidence and your faith. And that this is sort of a message that the book really talks about. And I think that is an important message to be able to talk about in situations like that. For Austria, I read Augusta Gruner, who has written a series of books about Detective Mueller. Detective Mueller is your classic Hercule Poirot, Sherlock Holmes type of detective. He is very, but he is more rough around the edges. He is probably more like Columbo as a character. I'm just throwing out a lot of other detectives, and that's sort of almost unfair for Gruner, because these books do stand on their own. And I think that if you enjoy detective stories, you will get something interesting out of these books, because they sort of have their own spin on a very known set genre that the detective genre in some ways actually is, which is probably why I keep talking about all other detectives. Which countries have you read from? What countries and authors would you like to recommend, both from countries I have talked about now, but also from other countries? The whole idea is about promoting good authors that we need to talk more about. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.